Hello everyone, I'm Irish Joker, and this is Getting Started with Speedrunning Trauma Center, Second Opinion, and New Blood. The purpose of this video will be to not only introduce prospective players to Speedrunning Trauma Center, but also giving current runners and anyone who's just familiar with the series an idea of what you should do before when I get started with running these games. So to start off, there are two languages that I know of with Second Opinion and New Blood. I guess the DS games also have English and Japanese versions, but outside of gameplay, there really isn't. Well, the gameplay is the same. It's just the text is different, and it may not seem like it, but there's a 20-second difference between out of operation text skipping in the Japanese version of Second Opinion and 23 seconds in New Blood. The reason why it's faster is because Japanese has more information per character than English. So, for example, to like the word person in English is 5 letters, but in Japanese it's just hito, which one character. So you can imagine that projected over an entire game that's very text heavy. You can have a difference in difference in thousands of characters, and that on its own just saves you time. However, this difference isn't really all that It's not that important if you're just casually wanting to get started, and you're just interested in trying to learn the game. Unless you're trying to go for something competitive like below an hour and a half Second Opinion or below 2 hours in New Blood, it's not that imperative to get the Japanese version. Unless, of course, you like the Japanese audio. So next, after having the game, comes the TV. And for not only Trauma Center, but retro games in general, there is a difference between playing on a CRT and an LCD. Now, in case those terms, anyone who's not familiar with those terms, CRTs are those older, big, blocky TVs that were pretty popular throughout the 20th century. They're pretty big and really a hassle to move around. But these are actually the best televisions to play analog consoles on. So, like the Super Nintendo, N64, Sega Genesis, and even the Wii, which was still an analog console, even though it was it's one of the newer consoles out. CRTs are more or less the preferred, at least in my opinion, the preferred television to use when not only playing older games, but just speedrunning in general. They have a better refresh rate. The older consoles, especially like the NES and the Super Nintendo, were built to be played on CRTs, so it's just much more compatible on that. But again, the downside is CRTs are pretty big, heavy, and I don't think most people have them nowadays, at least at the time of this video. And they're becoming increasingly rare, surprisingly. I've been to thrift stores and Goodwill, and fewer and fewer are having cheap CRTs, or CRTs in general, available. So if you still have an old CRT lying around, I wouldn't suggest throwing it out just yet if you have an interest in playing older games. Now, LCD TVs, on the other hand, they offer progressive scan, which is basically just a trying to think of a much more simple way to put it. It's just a sync rate is more or less kept the same. Well, it's probably wrong, but I don't want to get too into progressive scan. But it's just basically better image quality than a CRT. Some CRTs do have component, but pretty much every LCD has component out. So Wii has component, PS2 has components, so does the original Xbox. So all of these have more or less 480p and 720p and higher quality output options, whereas most CRTs, with very few exceptions, have only 480i, which is interlaced quality, or 240p. But I'll get into 240p a bit later. And of course, LCDs are much more common. They're thinner and easier to fit in your room. So, of course, generally speaking, most people prefer to play on an LCD, or just because it's available. However, these are very susceptible to input lag, and for Trauma Center especially, you do not want input lag when using the Wiimote. Now, this is more or less the perfect balance between a consumer CRT and a consumer LCD. PVMs and BVMs, which stand for Professional Video Monitors and Broadcast Video Monitors. They have excellent picture quality, they can output 240p, and they have, the same refresh rate as a regular consumer CRT. So yeah, just like do a web search for like Sony PVM or Sony broadcast monitor, and you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. So, but this is more or less like the best thing to run or speedrun older games on. And I personally run on a Sony BVM 20G1U, and it's been really good so far. Downside to them is that they're generally very difficult to find, more so than CRTs, and you can only find them on like eBay, Craigslist, or I lucked out and was able to find one locally, but yeah, if you don't live near like a TV station, or in a city like Los Angeles or Austin, Miami, example, just throwing out random larger cities, it can be kind of difficult to find listings that are locals where you can just pick one up. They're also kind of expensive. They generally tend to run to around, depending on what size. Like if you get like an 8-inch, it'll only be like $50 to $70. But the 20-inch PVMs and BVMs can be even more expensive, at least in the US. But these are only if you like really want really good quality video output. I'm just offering this as an option for those who want the best of both worlds for LCDs and CRTs. Now that you have your setup, you have your TV, the game, and everything. Oh, one more thing I want to add before I go into the practice ops. Try to keep your TV like at the same level that you are. You don't want to have your TV on the floor or on a dresser that's too high. You don't want to have it too high or too low where you have to bend or angle your wrists when you're playing Trauma Center on the Wii, because you're going to be spending hours playing these games, and you don't want to hurt your wrists, having to bend at an angle to match where the sensor bar is. So I recommend trying to get a TV cart or like some kind of table that's at the same level that you're sitting at. All right, so second opinion, these are the operations I recommend practicing, in no particular order, of course. 6/8 Savato, this is the last operation in the game. There's a lot to explain about Savato, which I'll cover in future videos, but I'll just say right now, just practice Savato, practice lasering, getting used to the rhythm of lasering and injecting, keeping the vitals up, and practice suturing. 2-1 Thrombi. This is a very good operation for learning tool switching, because I think you use like 5 different tools in the Thrombi operation, and this will get you really familiar with using the nunchuck and memorizing where most of the tools are in this game. 5-2 Kiriaki. This is probably going to be this is probably going to be the next video I cover, because Kiriaki, much like 2-1, has a decent amount of tool switching and covers the basics of using the gel suturing, and obviously the first more or less boss fight in Second Opinion. 6-4 is kind of a mix of Kiraki and Paraskevi, another boss, if you will, that you'll fight later on. But this is also at least starting out, it's one of the more difficult operations to learn, but again, this will help train you with suturing and dealing with multiple things at the same time in Second Opinion. And 310 is just treaty. Treaty, again, throughout the run, it's going to be pretty easy, but if you know how to deal with treaty without using the healing touch, it'll give you options for 6-7, which is the second to last operation in the game, for safety strats, in case you have a really good run, but you want to save your healing touch for Devtera. So, yeah, I just recommend practicing treaty for that. Alright, New Blood. So these are some recommended ops. New Blood has a few more operations than Second Opinion. They're also more varied, but these are just the ones I wanted to highlight. So 2-5, which is third degree burn operation. There are only 2 burn operations to deal with in the game, but both of them are very time consuming and will make your wrist very sore during the run. So you want to try and spend as little time as possible doing these operations, since why you want to practice them as well. And of course, this is also a good operation to practice using the scalpel, since you have to cut out a lot of skin grafts, and you also use the forceps a lot, putting each skin graft onto the burned areas. 4-2 is just a standard emergency operation. I just think it's a solid operation it's a good warm-up operation before you do a run, since you have to deal with draining blood pools, suturing, the standard fare for what you'll run into playing Trauma Center. 4-3 Miracle Surgery. This it's basically an obstacle course of scripted events and vitals, like more or less trying to crash all the time. So I recommend watching my past personal best videos, or go to speedrun.com and watch how me and other runners like Thurler and I think Slurpee has a run as well. Slurpee Ninja has a run. I recommend just watching how we approach 4-3, because there are very narrow windows for when you have time to extract tumors and boost vitals and all that. 4-5. 4-5 is... It's not the most difficult operation, just for me personally, because you have to draw a star, but generally speaking, the most important thing about ops is managing the laser and not just keeping it held down all the time. There are times you want to more or less hold back on using it. I'll explain that in a later video. 6-5. You have 5 patients that are all suffering from bullet wounds and various injuries. This is just a good, solid operation to practice operating not only 5 different patients, but also to practice suturing, forceps, blood pool draining, vital stabilization. Pretty much most of the game mechanics that you'll run into in Trauma Center. And lastly, 6-6. This is by far the hardest operation in the game, and definitely between at least New Blood and Second Opinion. It's easily the hardest operation in the game, because you have to, on the second patient, you have to contend with Onyx and Share, do a transplant, and watch the vitals all at the same time. It's a lot to manage and juggle. So definitely something you want to practice and get good with. And that's about it for getting started, for the basics of Trauma Center. I know there wasn't really any gameplay that I showed. I just wanted to more or less provide a guess just just a level playing field for where you a starting point for where you should start. Obviously, you want to play through both games at least once or twice before deciding whether or not you want to learn these games. But I highly recommend it. Promise Hunter is a very fun and challenging game, and definitely a speedrun worth checking out. So yeah, look forward to more videos. I'm going to try and cover most of the guilt strains in Second Opinion, the Stigma, and New Blood, as well as other difficult operations like the ones I mentioned in the practice ops earlier. I'll try to show gameplay and walk through how to do those ops and the best way to go through them. All right, thanks for watching, everyone.